Looks like there are just 4 screws that I need to remove here to pop the cover off of this and see what it looks like inside. Something that I pretty well do with every inverter that I have ever bought, because I want to know what's in it before I even power it up. Every once in a while you'll get one of these things and something will have rattled loose in shipment, and if you hadn't opened it up you would have caused problems. So I like doing this. I also do it because I just want to know what's inside the thing. Make sure that I don't lose those screws. It's kind of interesting on these particular screws that they're high quality. They have pre-tapped holes for these, it would appear, rather than self-threaded. It's kind of interesting. I've never actually seen that before. Anyway, pop the cover off and we can see what is inside this inverter. Here's what I'm talking about with the pre-threaded holes. They actually took the time and expense to pre-thread these before they put in the actual screw. You can see that the anodization goes all the way through them. So they actually used a tap to thread these holes. I have never seen that before. And it may seem like a little bit of a waste of money to do that, but it's actually very nice, because if you don't pre-tap them when you thread in the self-tapping screw, you get metal filings inside your inverter. Good quality inverters don't do it that way because they don't want metal filings inside their product shorting things out. And this does not have metal filings in it. It is nice and clean. So overall, so far, I am extremely impressed with the construction quality. But you know, we haven't even looked inside yet, so let's do that. Here's the inverter with the cover removed. And I could take off these end panels and slide out the actual product, but I'm not going to do that just yet. Let's take a look inside. And in here, I am actually extremely interested in how they put this thing together, because I've never seen one of these low to mid-priced inverters constructed like this. And I actually like what I see. This is relatively impressive. Inside, it's extremely clean. If you take a look at the circuit board down here, for example, it's automated assembly, surface mount components and such. Everything is extremely clean on it. Most of the components in here appear to be Chinese sourced, which isn't necessarily a problem, but you never really know what you're getting unless you're a designer in that region, so I'll reserve judgment, because overall the quality looks pretty decent. These 2 output capacitors over here are 200 volt capacitors, which is somewhat marginal. Also, their size is somewhat marginal for an inverter of a kilowatt output. But other than that, everything in here looks really good. The PCB is nice and clean. It appears to be a good quality one. It's not the cheapest crap that you can buy. These 6 output diodes, to me, are a little bit suspect, because these will get quite warm and they're not heat sinked. So we'll have to see about that. What I'm going to do on these is to bend them apart just slightly so that they can cool better. There we go. That should help them cool better. It's also closer to the airflow of the fan. These 3 inductors in here, the transformers, they're nice and heavy, appear to be well constructed, much better than some of the cheap stuff that you can get out there. Over here on the other side, this is the input side, and there are plenty of input capacitors. Those input caps end up with a very high ripple. They are labeled 105C 25 volt caps, which is great. They are also labeled low ESR because they definitely have to be. Here is another input board. Once again, it seems to be relatively well made. There are some hand kludges on here in terms of hand soldering and hand assembly, but it looks like it's relatively well done, so I'm not going to complain about any of that. In this price range, it's perfectly acceptable. And overall, everything looks good except one important thing. These transformer cars are loose, and this is what I heard rattling around inside. This one and this one. This one did not break loose in shipment. So these transformers should still work just fine, but they're probably going to vibrate and make some noise. So you could put a dab of glue or something on here to hold them in place, but otherwise they should still work just fine. They just rattle around a little bit. I'm just going to leave them this way for testing, but if I choose to keep this inverter or resell it, either way, I am still going to glue these down because I don't want them rattling around. It Sounds bad, and it'd probably make them buzz a little bit under operation. But that shouldn't be a defect of the actual design or construction. It's just it really got thrown around in shipment is what I think. And it won't affect its performance at all either. These are ferrite transformers, and they have a calibrated air gap in them. That's what this Teflon tape is doing. It's holding together two halves of this E-core transformer. And the calibrated gap appears to be in place yet, so I don't think there's going to be any issues there. The inverter is now fully out of its case. In case you're curious, the case is relatively heavy. It's a nice quality anodized aluminum case, no complaints. No iron filings or aluminum filings anywhere, which is great. It was also held to the case by some of these threaded holes in this heatsink. Once again, it's not a self-tapping screw. They used a die and they tapped those holes. Congrats to Bestek. So this is the actual circuit board. Now the quality of the circuit board seems relatively good. However, these traces seem relatively thin. I'm not sure if they used ½ ounce, 1 ounce, 2 ounce, 4 ounce copper on this, but it looks like it's just a standard 1 ounce copper. Now, you may notice that the surface looks a little bit textured. That's an acrylic coating. Not many inverters do that anymore. A lot of them used to. That helps for corrosion. And I am, again, rather impressed to see that on an inverter of this price point. The bottom is acrylic coated, the top is not. And it doesn't appear that any of these other control boards are either. So why they chose to coat the bottom and not the top, I will never know. But at least they coated something. That's better than most do. This is one of the reasons why I always like taking these things apart before I power them on. You never know what's wrong. This happens to just be a ground, so it's not that important, but this connection is extremely loose. So I'm going to retighten this ground connection on here and then reassemble it all. But overall, I like what I see. For the price point, this looks very, very good. How does it actually perform? Well, that's a whole nother matter, isn't it? And we'll test that soon. One more thing I should mention before reassembling it is the cooling. Now, on a lot of these cheap inverters, you can tell that they're not really designed well thermally. This one isn't that way. This one doesn't seem to be designed quite well. I can't tell what the brand of the fan is or any of that right now, but we'll ignore that for the moment. But the thermal design of this is pretty good. I kind of like it. I've never seen one designed quite exactly like this before, which means that they did their own work. I like seeing that. This is the anodized clamshell case, which is great for cooling, much better than plastic. I always like to see a aluminum case rather than plastic, if possible. Plastic may be cheaper, but it doesn't cool as well. However, a lot of the inverters don't actually heatsink to this case, like this one. You can see that there's nothing clamped to any of this. These are the heat sinks. However, they're not just little false heatsink blocks inside. They actually do have some airflow over them. They are clamped well to the FETs. They have this top over here that is perforated so that you can get more surface area, more cooling on them. The fan over here draws air over these three transformers, which will get very hot during operation. It doesn't actually damage them for them to get very hot, but it does decrease efficiency. And because of the location of these vent holes over here, it should cool these heatsink blocks reasonably well. But there is one improvement that I would have liked to see. This block over here should be clamped to the side of this case, like this one is. Now, I suspect they didn't do that because they realized that they didn't have to. This is the output stage, and it doesn't get anywhere near as hot as the input stage. So they took the input stage and they screwed it to the actual case. The output stage, they did not. And you can see that this fan is not centered perfectly, so that more of the airflow goes over the output stage than the input. There's also more of a space over here, keeping it away from the actual case. Now, when I reassemble this, I'm going to make one significant improvement that I wish they had done, and that is to use some sort of thermal interface material. Before, they just clamped this to this case. That's a very poor thermal interface. I want to actually see this heatsink to the case, so I'm going to put some thermal interface material on it before I reassemble it. That should help these FETs stay quite a bit cooler. Now, would this actually make a significant difference to performance? Well, I'm not going to test it both ways, but before I reassemble it, I'm just going to do it right put it back together, and we'll give them the benefit of the doubt and just test this improved version. Usually I get my thermal interface material at Radio Shack, but it's looking like they won't be around much longer. So I took a risk. I went online and bought this Heatsink Compounds ZP360. No idea how well it works, but it was like $1.50 shipped to me. It took me 3 weeks to get it, but I don't really care. So let's see what this stuff does. Seems to go on easy enough. I'll just use it liberally because it's super cheap and good enough. Let's put it together. So there it is, all reassembled back up. And for once I have to say that the quality of the documentation does not match the quality of the product. The construction and engineering that went into this is obviously superior to most of the low-cost inverters out there. This is certainly more expensive than some of those very low-cost inverters, but overall, I like what I see. There are a few deficiencies inside. The heat sinking could have been a little bit better, even though I think it's pretty good overall. And the number of transistors inside is pretty skimpy for a 1000-watt inverter. They could have used really good quality parts. I can't tell without disassembling it further, and I'm not going to do that. So we'll just rely on its performance from this point on. So let's hook it up. I'm going to use their cables because this is what they gave me. And let's see how this thing really works. This paste, by the way, seems to be made really well. I can't tell for sure if it separates or gets hard under heat necessarily yet at this point, but for its price, which was $2 I think for this whole tube, and there's quite a bit in here, that's a really good deal. So I just went and I bought 2 more of them. Comes from Asia somewhere, Hong Kong I think. It takes almost a month to get it, but yeah, I'm pretty happy with that. One thing I wanted to mention quickly is that some people worry about the conductivity of the thermal interface material. Do not worry about that. That is irrelevant. Don't pay extra for the high conductivity silver stuff. Just get the cheap silicone stuff and that will work just fine. If mayonnaise didn't go bad, I would say slather it with mayonnaise and put it together because it really doesn't matter. What's important is that you don't have an air gap. That's what's important. The last tiny bit of incremental improvement, the last 5% or so that you get from going to high conductivity paste, is pretty well irrelevant. Proper application is far more important than the paste you use.